All Lamborghinis are very special cars, but some of them get a little bit more interesting or a little bit more significant based on moments in their past. The stories, the celebrities, whatever gets attached to the history of the car. And one of the central things about the idea of the VINwiki app has always been our effort to kind of empower users and stakeholders and anybody who knows about these interesting times in a car's history to attach those to kind of a living and breathing timeline of the car, different than what you might find in the institutional data from Carfax or Experian AutoCheck, things like that. And it's so much fun on some of these cars that we're going to talk about today that you can look at the more recent posts of these cars and see them being driven in a totally stock form by owners that may have absolutely no idea that years ago, life for that car was very, very different. And I want to talk today about some cars that have crazy past and what that might mean for them today. But in all likelihood, most of the owners of these cars today have absolutely no idea that a few years ago, the cars might have looked very different or lived again a very different existence. Now, some of these things might be discovered if you were shopping for a car with a pre-purchase inspection. And I want to talk about today's sponsor, the Lemon Squad. The Lemon Squad has a nationwide network of qualified mechanics that can inspect a car usually within 48 or 72 hours. And it's very inexpensive, and it is so valuable to have a real person put eyes and hands on a car, send you a bunch of pictures, check it all over, and give you the peace of mind as a used car buyer to know exactly what you're getting and to become an even shrewder negotiator as you have all this information about what a car might need to go back to the seller and get the best deal possible. So check out the Lemon Squad now at the link in the description below to help them help you shop for your next car with a lot more confidence and a lot more security in knowing exactly what it is. Because certain times these cars may have been modified back then, or they have been modified now to try to separate them from the past. And the first car I want to talk about is the Dead Rapper Murcielago. It's a 2003 Giallo Orion manual coupe, really cool car, early Mercy, and it was owned by a guy named Alexander Harris. And he was a co-founder of a music label, not necessarily a rapper himself, but the car has become known as the Dead Rapper Murcielago because unfortunately, Mr. Harris and a friend of his were shot dead in a barber shop. And when the funeral was held, they actually had a joint funeral for both friends together. Rather than presenting Mr. Harris in a casket, he wanted to be displayed in a football jersey, his sunglasses, hat, and everything, sitting in his Lamborghini Murcielago out in front of the funeral home. And so a very untraditional thing there. At the time, the car had a yellow and red interior, but now the car has an all black interior. It's sold several times since then. Rob Ferretti made a video about it. It was sold by Chicago Motor Cars, I know, fairly recently. And every time the car pops up, it's kind of presented as just any old 03 Mercy, but eventually somebody starts putting the pieces together and it becomes the Dead Rapper Murcielago again. And Doug Tabbitt and I talked for a time about whether or not that made the car more or less valuable. Him obviously saying, oh, it makes it so much less valuable. But to be honest, it's just a car at this point. And I think that having that as an element of its story when you're exchanging tales of your cars at Cars and Coffee or something like that, I think it kind of enriches the ownership experience. So rather than diminishing the value of the car, I think it's actually kind of special. But I haven't had the opportunity to ever vote with my checkbook on that one. Another car that looks very different now than it did in the past is a 1994 US Lamborghini Diablo SE30 in Lambo 30 purple. However, even though today it looks like a totally stock, perfect example with the cream leather seats like the US cars have, as opposed to the blue Alcantara seats that some of the European cars have, this car at one point had dolphins painted all over it by fairly famous artist Christian Layson. And he was famous for all these seascapes and underwater scenes. And so he had kind of taken that into what was described as a $250,000 paint job, putting dolphins on the sides and on the hood and the front of the car. And that was not necessarily seen as a positive aspect to the future buyers of the car, despite the fact that his paintings continue to sell for a good amount of money. And so since then, all of that has been removed, and the car is actually, I think most recently, was advertised by Matt Ivanhoe, the Cultivated Collector, and he wasn't hiding from that part of the car's past. He just realized that, certainly before his possession of the car, and John Tamarian at Curated had it at one point too, it has gone back to a stock form, which is probably a lot better way to present the car for the sake of value. However, I think if I had the car, I would have the dolphins redone as cling vinyl graphics so I could put them on, take them off, and kind of relive that crazy moment of the car's past. But most owners probably still have no idea that that was a part of it. Another one of my favorites is the 1998 Lamborghini Diablo SV that was sold by Victoria's Secret in one of their lingerie catalogs. They had inverted the V and the S graphics and done some special luggage and things like that. And I have been kind of casually searching for this car for about 5 years because all I know is that it was crashed and had a salvage title issued sometime in the mid-2000s, and it really hasn't been seen since I think 2011 or 2012. And so whoever owns that car probably just sees it as another white Diablo SV because there's pictures of it with the graphics removed, and there was not necessarily, I think, any like insignia inside the car that would have designated it as like a VS SV or whatever. And so who knows where the car is, but those things get so separated from the car's past as they transact through multiple owners that you might not even know that you had a car that was very, very special at some point in time and very expensive. I think it was massively more expensive than a normal Diablo SV when it was sold. The next one is another early yellow Mercy, but it's one that was owned by Kobe Bryant, and it kind of made news not just because an NBA player had a Mercy, which was not a wildly uncommon thing, but because he had actually customized the car, rumored to be like $400,000. Before paddle shift e-gear cars were available, she couldn't drive a manual transmission car, and so they had created some kind of like an optical sensor that when you put your hand on the shifter, it would engage the clutch so that you could select the next gear. It wouldn't, I don't believe, match throttle or do anything like that, but it was kind of the earliest form of an automated transmission on a Murcielago, and I have not seen the car pop back up. There was some thought at one point that there's another '02 formerly yellow Mercy that had the roof cut off of it kind of before the Roadsters came out as well. And I don't know if it's that car. That car comes and goes, and it's got some wonky body panels because it turns out when you cut the roof off, the body flexes a good bit. And so I don't know where that car is, and I would have to assume that it has gone back to more of a stock mechanical arrangement because that probably wouldn't have lasted very long from a mechanical or a clutch wear perspective, but nobody knows where Kobe's Mercy is. Now, recently we saw a lot of news about one of the Donald Trump Diablos selling for over $1.4 million at Barrett-Jackson. And that was the 1997 Roadster that's bounced around a few times, a blue Le Mans car, very, very cool spec. And that car is interesting because it is the one that is most often kind of affiliated with Trump whenever it is transacted. And it's sold several times since the 2016 election when Mike Digonis was advertising the car. Alex Roy wrote an article about it, asked me what my thoughts were. And I said, look, you know, at the time it was owned by a presidential candidate, there was a chance, albeit what everybody thought was a small one, that he was going to get elected, and then it would be a president's Lamborghini Diablo. And we've seen that in addition to all Diablos going up in value during that period of time just because of their age, we also saw that this one just brought crazy money due to that Trump connection. Now there's also a 94-95 VT Coupe in a darker bluish green color that there's a lot of good pictures of him pumping gas at a Palm Beach gas station in. And I am sure that I saw a listing, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago for a 2001 Diablo 6-liter car in Eli blue with a snow corn interior and the wheels painted black that was advertised as being Donald Trump's Diablo. Now, there are only 3 U.S. Eli blue 6-liter cars. One of them burned down a couple of years ago in the Southwest, I think in Scottsdale. One of them has sold a couple of times on Bring a Trailer, and I think Houston Crosta has that one. And the other one bounces around as well, but there's no great ties of any of the cars to Trump. Nobody's got an old registration. Now, the one that Houston has, I believe, was registered in the late 2000s, which would have been about the right time that I would have remembered it because I was working at the dealership and essentially looking at every single Lamborghini listing that would go online. And I think that's probably the car, but without an official tie, it hasn't currently impacted the value. So if only we'd had VINwiki back then and those posts could be made. Roy Katz also remembers that being one of his cars, and he feels like he saw a picture of him with the car parallel parked in New York, but who knows? Another car that kind of recently popped up during the course of a restoration was a Gallardo coupe that was owned by Bam Margera. And he and Billy Idol had cut a sunroof in the car, so that was a telltale sign that it was that car. And it was purple, which is very rare on an early Gallardo in the US. And so he did Gumball 3000 in that car, and it went around. It was obviously on his Viva La Bam show. He also had a 2006 Murcielago Roadster E-Gear car. And no one has seen that car, and there's nothing new on Carfax since 2015. But a really, really cool cool spec. I mean, I lived our life. It got a little bit of a bump at one point. I think he backed it into a Cadillac or something like that. But these cars, owned by crazy celebrities at some points, have had some interesting days, and that certainly is one of them. Another early Gallardo with a crazy past is a white coupe that Brett David of Prestige Imports let an artist draw all over with Sharpie markers. It's called the Sharpie Gallardo, but when he eventually sold the car, the new owner didn't want it on there, and so it was all removed. I believe they had done all the Sharpie work on top of PPF film, although some of it was on the glass and stuff like that, which I guess you could just get right off. But at the end of the day, it does not look like the Sharpie Gallardo today, but the current owner probably would never even recognize that it's their car when you see all of these legendary pictures of such an interesting artistic expression on an early Gallardo down in Miami. Another early Murcielago that's just imprinted on my mind is the one that was owned by Busta Rhymes. And that car recently came back on the market through Assimi, but it's a Verda Ithaca early car. And I remember it with all the flip mode graphics. And I think it was on an MTV Whips, Rides, and Dubs edition special that was just, rather than MTV Cribs Houses, just the cars. And Busta Rhymes obviously was probably the height of his career in the early 2000s. And it was so cool to see the celebrity attachment with the giant wheels. I think they were Maya wheels at the time and stuff like that. And so that car has bounced around. I actually took it on trade once on an Aventador in a transaction, and that's the Aventador that I crashed with the kid in the passenger seat. Not too bad, but I've told a few stories about that car. And so seeing it pop up, there are still some artifacts of the Busta Rhymes history. I think the headrests are still embroidered with flip mode. When I had it, the LED lights were still in the engine bay and the door jambs and stuff like that. And so, you know, that's one of those things where an early Verda Ithaca car is so valuable and so rare that you kind of want it to be stock, but also that is a really, really significant part of kind of the Lamborghini and rapper history, which was a big deal. You know, you had the rumors of 50 Cent putting $1 million in cash or whatever in the front of his like early chromed Murcielago Roadster. All these moments in history that really did cement how much people my age love these cars. And so all of these cars have continued to live a life with different owners, different collectors, and in some ways very different than this existence they may have had prior. But what we're trying to do here is make it easier and at least more possible to connect those crazy moments in their past with whatever the future becomes. And once again, I want to thank the Lemon Squad for supporting this video and so much content this year on VINwiki. When you're buying a pre-owned car, please get an inspection. The easiest and most affordable and fastest way to get that done is with the Lemon Squad. Their nationwide network of qualified mechanics can be on site usually within 72 hours. Honestly, in my experience, usually it's within 24 hours. And there is nothing more valuable than having those eyes and hands on the car, giving you a bunch of pictures and a full report of whatever the car is to make you the shrewdest negotiator possible and help you understand exactly what you're getting into when you're buying your next car. So check out the Lemon Squad now at the link in the description below to thank them for their support of VINwiki.